Good morning. It's April 18th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with the U.S. military's recognition of North Korea's missile capabilities. The commander of U.S. versus Korea says the regime's missiles are capable of reaching Washington, D.C. and beyond. Meanwhile, the North says it will go ahead with launching its first military reconnaissance satellite as planned. The European Union has agreed on a multi-billion-dollar plan to increase semiconductor supply. The plan is to grasp 20% of the global chip market by 2030. And South Korea has rolled out a mission to wipe out drug crimes in a bid to return to being a so-called drug-free nation. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has ordered the launch of the regime's first military surveillance satellite as planned. Now, that's within this month. The North Korean media reported on Wednesday that Kim inspecting the regime's space agency called for final preparations to be made for the launch. Kim reportedly said it should be followed by more launches for collecting data and that pursuing a surveillance satellite is a part of its sovereignty and self-defense. He cited the deployment of U.S. strategic assets to the Korean peninsula, claiming it is turning the South into Washington's outpost against the North. This comes as Pyongyang last December announced that it has conducted a critical final stage test in developing a reconnaissance satellite and is aiming for April as the deadline for completing the process. It's been nearly a week since North Korea test-fired what it called a new solid-fuel intercontinental ballistic missile, a development that's put the U.S. and Korea on high alert. At a hearing on Tuesday, the commander of U.S. Forces Korea said that the Kim Jong-un regime is capable of striking the U.S. Capitol and beyond. Our Han Sang-woo has the details.
Commander of the U.S. Forces Korea, General Paul LaCamera, has warned that the Kim Jong-un regime in North Korea has developed military might capable of striking Seoul, Tokyo, Washington, and beyond. At a House Armed Services Committee hearing on national security challenges in the Indo-Pacific, LaCamera told American lawmakers on Tuesday that the priority of the USFK is to protect the U.S. and its allies, stressing that the United States' alliance with South Korea has deterred Pyongyang from waging war for nearly 7 decades and helped South Korea develop into a prosperous democracy. Taking into account the North's evolving nuclear and missile threats, though, he highlighted the need to strengthen the alliance, saying that the U.S. must never take it for granted as its center of gravity in deterring the Kim regime, and that the Korean War taught the U.S. that it must always be ready and forward-postured with its allies to ensure continued peace and stability on the peninsula. The general reassured the committee, however, that the joint forces are ready should Pyongyang increase hostilities. But regarding what's believed to be a new solid-fuel intercontinental ballistic missile the North test-fired last week, LaCamera said that such ICBMs do influence the United States' so-called indications and warnings efforts. Solid-fuel ICBMs are known to be harder to detect and require less pre-launch preparation. Congressman Seth Moulton of the Democratic Party expressed similar concerns the same day, pointing out that the 11 ICBMs Pyongyang displayed in a military parade back in February show that the U.S. may not have enough missiles to intercept them to protect its mainland. Han Sang-woo, Arirang News.
The U.S. has avowed a stronger commitment to countering nuclear threats, pointing to the dangers posed by North Korea, China, and Russia. In a news conference on Tuesday following the G7 foreign ministers meeting in Tokyo, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the talks were focused on addressing Pyongyang's ballistic missile launches, Russia's suspension of a nuclear arms treaty, and China's buildup of its nuclear arsenal. He also cited Iran's expansion of nuclear activities, adding that all these only strengthen Washington's determination to address nuclear dangers. On the same day, during an annual NATO conference on arms control, Deputy Secretary Wendy Sherman pointed to the same countries, stressing the need for NATO's united deterrence. The EU on Tuesday followed in the footsteps of the US to reduce reliance on semiconductor supply from other countries. Now, the bloc aims to increase its global chip market share to 20% by 2030. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
Last August, the U.S. signed its CHIPS Act with the aim of producing more semiconductors in the country. And on Tuesday, the EU agreed to a $47 billion plan for its semiconductor industry in a move to catch up to both the U.S. and Asia, while reducing its dependency on regions outside the bloc for its semiconductor needs. The EU CHIPS Act, which was initially proposed by the European Commission last year, looks to double the EU's share of global chip output to 20% by 2030, compared to the current production output of 10%. The plan also allows the bloc to build up its local semiconductor supply chain and prevent any chip shortages for important sectors, such as the automotive industry. EU Chief Ursula von der Leyen praised Tuesday's deal, saying the CHIPS Act will allow for a competitive chips industry and build a foundation for a global market share. With Asian semiconductor players like South Korea, Taiwan, and China already dominating the global market share, it'll be tough competition ahead, with the EU needing to quadruple its production rate to meet the 20% target. But since the news of the EU's chip subsidies plan last year, the EU has attracted over $100 billion in public and private investments. On top of that, the EU CHIPS Act has expanded the scope of these subsidies to further boost its competition against other countries. This includes a plan to expand subsidies across the whole production cycle to include research and development centers and mature chip production, and not just the factories where the chips are made. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Over in Sudan, clashes are still being reported despite an internationally brokered 24-hour ceasefire between the regular army and the rival paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. Conflicts are reportedly ongoing, mostly in the capital Khartoum, with both sides accusing the other of failing to respect the ceasefire. The truce agreement followed discussions between warring factions and U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and other countries in order to evacuate the wounded, stranded, in crossfires. According to the German press agency, at least 270 people have been killed in the conflict so far, with 2,600 people being injured. Drug crimes have never been too much of a headache here in South Korea, but with a fast-growing number of drug-related crimes, President Yoon Suk-yeol has declared a mission to combat illegal drugs. Our Kim Do-yeon reports.
President Yoon Suk-yeol expressed concern over the rise in illegal drug use in Korea and called for a comprehensive campaign to fight it. He said it's especially shocking how prevalent drugs are for teenagers.
지난 10년 전까지만 해도 대한민국은 검찰, 경찰은 물론 해경, 보건당국, 세관 등 많은 기관의 협력과 노력으로 마약 청정국을 유지할 수 있었습니다. 그런데 어느 순간부터 정부 당국의 방치로 마약이 국민의 건강과 정신을 황폐화시킬 뿐 아니라 청소년의 꿈과 희망을 파괴하고 있습니다.
This came as President Yoon held a cabinet meeting this Tuesday morning. In his opening remarks, which were broadcast live, he also emphasized that the number of drug-related convictions is expected to surpass 20,000 this year for the first time. He made sure to set a deadline and call for relevant agencies to work together in eradicating the drug-related crimes.
He re-emphasized that all government agencies should come up with a plan together to respond to the growing illegal drug problem, so there could be a clear result by the end of this year.
During the cabinet meeting, President Yoon also shared his intentions to root out nepotism in the workplace, underscoring that it violates the country's constitution. This, as he said, the core of labor reform in South Korea is upholding the rule of law. He also urged relevant ministers to give priority to budget management to ensure productive government spending, saying the blind distribution of cash and patronizing populist policies need to be rejected. 김도연, Arirang News.
The world's oldest surviving book made using movable metal printing, Korea's Jikji 심체 요절, is on public display in Paris for the first time in half a century. It was printed in the 14th century. For more on this Korean literary treasure, we're joined by Director David Redman. He's also a co-director of the documentary on Jikji, Jikji Code. Welcome to the program.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us. First off, Director Redman, I've read that you are the one who proposed making the Jikji story into the documentary Jikji Code. What was it about the story that made you so passionate about it?
Well, I'd been to Korea before, and I'd heard about Jikji, and I kind of discounted that this was the first book. I grew up in the Canadian education system, and we were taught that Gutenberg had invented movable metal print, and he changed the world. So back in 2013, I was traveling in Europe, and a friend of mine asked me to go to the French National Library and apply to see Jikji. I was curious, I went along, and we were shocked by the attitude of the staff at the library. Nobody knew anything about Jikji, and they even pointed out to us that Gutenberg was first, not Jikji. So finally, we found one person that looked Jikji up on the internet. And they said, oh my God, it's here and we own it. And what an amazing collection we have. And so, I just realized at that time just how prevalent Eurocentrism is. And then I started to analyze my own thoughts on that and how I was resistant to believing that this technology came from Korea and it wasn't a different vocabulary or a different technology. It was movable metal print. So then I started looking at, I realized I also had shared this Eurocentric view, and it comes from the systems that we were taught and we grew up in. So then I thought, looked at what UNESCO and the Korean government were doing to promote Jikji. And I thought, well, if you look at it, over almost everybody in the world, nobody knows anything about Jikji. So I wanted to do something to try and help change that narrative and try to right this historic wrong. And that's when I started making this documentary.
That's amazing. Your curiosity turned into discovering much uncovered history, and also turning that history into a meaningful masterpiece, the documentary Jikji Code.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
And
I'm
also,
not sure it's a masterpiece, but
it is a good documentary. Now, for those who may be unfamiliar with the history behind Jikji, could you explain why Jikji is in France at the moment, not Korea?
Okay. So in the 19th century, the first French ambassador to Korea was Colin de Plancy. And he was a collector of books and art and furniture. And he took Jikji back to France, and it ended up being donated to the French National Library. And they lost it for decades. And then in 1967, Dr. Byung-sung Park, a Korean academic working at the library, rediscovered it. Now, the current French government stance is they would loan Jikji back to South Korea. But right now, as you know, it's on display at the French National Library. And if you want to see it, you got to buy a ticket and fly to Paris to see it.
Right. Well, it sounds like you have much passion for not just Jikji, but also overall the books and the metal printing and involving all the history. Now, the question is, why do Jikji's story and history matter? I mean, why does the world need to know and learn about it, as you've created a documentary on it, a whole documentary on it?
Right. Well, Jikji is important for several reasons, and one of them is spiritual. Jikji's message is non-possession, ironically, and another message is interconnectivity. but also the technology. This is the proof that Korea was using this technology before anyone else. Now, movable metal print, it's metal, so it's hard, it's durable, it's movable. So the economy of scale allowed books to be produced en masse. So that changed the way that we were able to record and transmit information. And in Europe, in the 15th century, that started the world's first information revolution. And so if we look at Korea, I think that this is actually Korea's most important cultural export. We have K-pop, K-drama, and my favorite is K-food, but this is K-print, if you will, and it changed the world.
Right. Before we let you go quickly, please do share with us one of your favorite memories from the filming the documentary.
Oh, okay. I don't know if this is my favorite, but it's certainly the most impactful. On the third last day of our European trip, we've been there for three weeks. We had everything stolen in Rome, our computers, our camera equipment, our footage. And so it was devastating. You know, it was a crisis, and it was a point where I was thinking we weren't going to be able to continue this project. And so, but you know, in a crisis, it sounds cliche, but you find a detail that spurs you on. And we've been doing a lot of research on the envoys in the 13th and 14th century that have been traveling from Europe all the way to Beijing in Korea. Now, those people really suffered a lot of hardships and dangers on the road. And here we were in hotel rooms in Rome eating, wonderful Korean or Italian food and moaning about the situation. So I had a credit card left, the only one on the team, and we took that card and we rented a car and we drove back across Europe for 2 weeks and we shot the film.
Wow, what a story. That turned out to be, like I said, a masterpiece.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us this morning and also your insights all the way from Toronto.
Okay, thank you.
South Korea has decided to extend its fuel tax cut measures until the end of August to ease the burden on people's livelihoods. They were due to expire this month. Under the extension, tax cuts on gasoline remain at 25%, while the rate for diesel is unchanged at 37%. Finance Ministry's Tuesday's announcement came despite concerns about the government's tax revenue, which recorded its greatest ever on-year decline earlier this year. The ministry added that the recent announcement by the OPEC Plus about production cuts was also taken into consideration. With oil prices hitting record highs around the world last year, South Korea has been offering a temporary concession on fuel. South Korea has issued its first ever report on climate change adaptation. Now, it shows the country's climate is heating up at a faster pace than the global average. Our Lee Si-hoo tells us more.
South Korea's climate is warming at a faster rate than the global average. From 1912 to 2020, the average annual temperature in South Korea has increased by approximately 1.6 degrees Celsius, surpassing the global average of 1.09 degrees Celsius. This is according to the Ministry of Environment's report released Tuesday on the nation's sustained efforts and actions toward climate adaptation. Titled The Republic of Korea's Adaptation Communication, the report serves as the first of its kind submitted by Korea to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change as required by the Paris Agreement, an international treaty on climate change signed in 2015. The report notes that from 1968 to 2017, the sea level temperature in South Korea has risen by 1.23 degrees. This is 2.6 times greater than the global average of 0.48 degrees. The sea level from 1989 to 2018 has also risen by an annual average of 2.97 millimeters, surpassing the global average annual rise of 1.7 millimeters. To adapt to such change, South Korea has established a multitude of legal frameworks, policies, and institutional arrangements. Following the nation's first legal framework for climate change adaptation, enacted in 2010, the Framework Act on Low Carbon, Green Growth, in 2021, the Framework Act on Carbon Neutrality and Green Growth for Coping with Climate Crisis was passed, with enforcement to begin a year later. The law requires the central government to monitor climate change and implement adaptation plans. The nation has also developed what's called the Master Plan on Carbon Neutrality and Green Growth, which provides guidelines for responding to climate change until the year 2050. Meanwhile, South Korea is actively sharing its experience in implementing effective adaptation plans. The Ministry of Environment in its report reaffirmed South Korea's commitment to working with the international community in achieving the global goal on adaptation established under the Paris Agreement. Lee Si-hu, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Matthew Ashley, and we now turn over to stories from around the world. We begin in the United States, where Fox News has agreed to pay just over $787 million to settle a defamation suit filed by Dominion Voting. The decision was announced in the Delaware Superior Court on Tuesday local time, just before lawyers for both sides were set to deliver their opening arguments. Dominion Voting initially sought $1.6 billion in its lawsuit. It was filed after Fox News broadcasts supported false claims that Dominion voting machines were used in ballot rigging during the 2020 U.S. presidential election. Dominion Voting claimed that the broadcasts had damaged its reputation. It was also revealed that several Fox News employees did not believe the claims but broadcast them anyway. As part of the settlement, Fox News has admitted to telling lies, but has said it is pleased to end the legal dispute. Dominion Voting has called the settlement historic. Turning over to China, where state media says that at least 21 people have been killed in a hospital fire. The fire broke out at Beijing's Changfeng Hospital on Tuesday local time. Some patients desperate to escape the flames climbed out of their windows by tying together bed sheets to make ropes. At least 71 people have been rescued, and the fire has since been extinguished. It's not clear if all the people who were inside the hospital have been found or how many of the dead were patients. The cause of the fire is still being investigated. Now, tech billionaire Elon Musk has said he will launch a new artificial intelligence platform called TruthGPT. In an interview with Fox News on Monday, Musk said it will challenge other AI platforms offered by OpenAI and Google. According to the 51-year-old, TruthGPT is, quote, unlikely to annihilate humans and will seek to understand the universe. But the platform's development progress is unknown. Musk, a co-founder of OpenAI, has accused its ChatGPT of being trained to lie. In March, he joined 1,100 tech industry leaders who signed an open letter calling for a 6-month halt to the training of AI. This over fears that it may pose a threat to humanity.
Good morning. On Monday, despite murky and wet start to the day, we had a really nice turnaround in the late afternoon, and that trend continues today. And even those of us in central parts of the country will see T-shirt weather with temperatures going up 10 degrees higher than yesterday afternoon. So it will feel more like late June than April today. But it is a breezy start to the day under dazzling sunshine in the capital area. Sunshine will send highs well into the high 20s this afternoon, leading to gaps of more than 15 degrees Celsius in most parts of the country. More pleasant news is air quality. It will be normal to good nationwide today, except in Incheon. Meanwhile, southern provinces will be under rather cloudy skies with cooler highs at just 19 degrees Celsius in Busan. The capital region's summer warmth will last for the day. Then light rain in northern central regions will bring back seasonal norms tomorrow, while southern provinces will get a glimpse of summer with an expected high of 30 degrees Celsius in Daegu tomorrow. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
That is all we have for today's New Day at Arirang. Thanks for watching.